Welcome to another edition of the Backyard Professor videos. I'm Kerry Schertz, the Backyard Professor. I'm here by these beautiful mountain flowers. I don't know if you can see these or not. They're really beautiful. All the bees are out. It's so good to see the bees. We're in trouble with the bees, so they're disappearing. And if they disappear, we are in trouble as a group. We have to have the bees, so it's good to see them buzzing around. I just hope they don't sting me. Anyway, I found Margaret Barker's analysis of the Jubilee and her calculation of the various Jubilees. The Jubilee was there's an argument about whether they were 49 years or 50 years, and I'll explore her exploration. In the meantime, as basically an introduction to this 11Q Melchizedek text, the ideas behind it, which she uses in her calculations of the Jubilees, because that's what the Dead Sea Scrolls community was doing, and it's fascinating how they were doing that. However, as a background to this, in her book On Earth as It Is in Heaven, Temple Symbolism in the New Testament, this is by T&T Clark for 1995. It's a wonderful little book. It's not a very large book. She gives a few basic principles that shows that the entire stage of the New Testament theology is based upon the temple, specifically the Day of Atonement, which is very important in the Dead Sea Scrolls also. But here's what she says on page 53. I just want to read a little bit to you. There are several biblical passages which describe how the Lord came from His Holy of Holies for the judgment. For behold, the Lord is coming forth out of His place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. Now this isn't a vengeful God. He's just said, look, if you'll live this certain way, you will be blessed with prosperity in the land, with cooperative neighbors, and so on and so forth. But if you don't live a certain way, you're going to end up in iniquity, being in bondage one to another, slavery, so on and so forth. This was the idea of the principle of the Jubilee, a forgiveness of debts and the releasing of the captives, the slaves, because they would be held slaves for 7 years in the land. They were released, so it wasn't a perpetual life of slavery. You know, we could do well to bring back this concept of the Jubilee in our country, couldn't we? There's too many greedy people who love to keep us in debt. Financially, personally, whatever. We are a slave to the time clock. You know, it's kind of a good concept here. There's mercy involved here. There's forgiveness involved here. Anyway, the earth will disclose the blood shed upon her, and will no more cover her slain. That's Isaiah 26:21. For behold, the Lord is coming out of His place, and will come down and tread upon the high places of the earth, and the mountains will melt under Him. Boy, that's vivid imagery, isn't it? The mountains will melt under Him, and the valleys be cleft like wax before the fire, like waters poured down a steep place. That's Micah 1, verse 3. It is an ancient text embedded in Deuteronomy, which tells us what the Lord was doing when He came to His holy place. He avenges the blood of His servants and takes vengeance on His adversaries and atones the land of His people. Deuteronomy 32:43. He atones the land. This is so interesting. This must be what the Enochic text described as the healing of the earth. Atonement was seen as healing the wounds caused in the creation by the conduct either of the fallen angels or of their human counterparts. 1 Enoch itself begins with the description of the Lord coming forth from His holy place. The great Lord will come forth from His dwelling, and there shall be judgment on all men. That's 1 Enoch 1, verses 1 and verses 8. There follows the description of the fallen angels and the binding of Azazel. Well, who then was the high priest who performed the blood ritual? On earth as it is in heaven. He must have been the Lord. There are several grounds for thinking this. The first is the system of correspondences in temple rituals. Someone must have had this role. Second, we know that the high priest wore the divine name on his forehead. with the band and the phylactery. The Reformed Old Testament is rather sensitive about this and says that he wore a plate of gold on the front of his turban which said, "Holy to the Lord." That's Exodus 28:36. Well, other texts say that the golden plate was inscribed simply with the 4 letters of the sacred name. When he wore the sacred name, that was when he was able to make atonement. The sacred name was Yahweh, W-H-V-H, Yahweh. This is in the Yoma 7a. Well, the third thing is, one of the Dead Sea Scroll texts describes this great day of atonement, this time of the healing of the earth and the forgiving of the debts and the iniquities, a time of renewal. This Dead Sea Scroll text describes this great day of atonement when a heavenly high priest, Melchizedek himself, will atone for the children of light and bring judgment on Satan. This Melchizedek is described as your God in the 11Q Melchizedek. That's interesting. That's a good intro to the 11Q Melchizedek. How the Qumran community were taking all of the texts that they had from the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, the law, the writings, and the prophets, and putting them together in such a fashion as to calculate the Jubilees, because they looked forward to that, because who doesn't want to be free and released from debt and iniquity? Yes, that's correct. They calculated this and they put together their scriptures in such a way as to recognize something was wrong in the land, in the temple specifically, so they went out into the wilderness to live the law in its purity, awaiting the great day of judgment. This is what the 11Q Melchizedek is giving us. It's a fascinating study. Let me show you some more on that. Find myself a good seat up here. This is in Margaret Barker's The Great High Priest, The Temple Roots of Christian Liturgy. This is by T.N.T. Clark also. It's a 2003 text. This is in chapter 2, The Time is Fulfilled, and she's discussing this idea of Jesus and the Jubilee. As the millennium approached in Jesus' day, with first century Judaism, there was considerable interest in the Old Testament idea of Jubilee, but the New Testament application was unexplored. The Jubilee is a key element in understanding both the ministry of Jesus and Palestine in the first century of the Common Era. So she explores this Jubilee in an extremely interesting way. The Old Testament prescriptions for the Jubilee year are set out in Leviticus 25. This is one of the main texts that the 11Q Melchizedek Dead Sea Scroll explores. What she's done is she has seen which scriptural allusions in the 11Q Melchizedek there are, and now she's expanding on that. And this is beautiful background to this Dead Sea Scroll document. It's awesome how she does this. The land is to lie fallow. In the Jubilee, the land is to lie fallow, and all people return to their own property. Proclaim liberty. This is that word deror that I showed you in the fragment itself the other day. Proclaim liberty. Deror is the Hebrew word, throughout the land, not just in some spots. The whole land was at liberty now. All people, all animals, the entire land itself. It's an interesting concept of renewal and rest. And she notes that. Each of you shall return to his property and to his family. That's Leviticus 25, verse 10. Leased land returned to its original owners, it being against the law to buy and sell land in perpetuity. That's interesting, isn't it? In addition, every 7th year was a Sabbath year in which the land lay fallow, and all the Hebrews who had been enslaved for debt were released, and the debt thereby was canceled. Now that is a far more merciful, just, and helpful law to people than anything we have, isn't it? Our debts just keep right on accumulating. This is one instance where the application of the biblical ideas is not out of date. It should be brought back.